Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about what gluten sensitivity is exactly. It's our first lesson in the Go Gluten-Free with Me course. And I wanted to start here because when you all sent me your pre-course surveys telling me what you were hoping to be able to get out of this course, one of the things that you told me was that when you have tried to learn how to do this on your own, a lot of the material that you have read has done one of two things. Either it has not given you information that has been specific enough, not enough actionable information, or number two, the information assumes that you already have some baseline knowledge that you don't already have. So for the first few lessons, I just wanted to make sure that we are all on the same page as far as what we know in terms of the definitions of terms that we use in talking about gluten sensitivity, and also about what types of symptoms gluten may cause, what exactly gluten is, what gluten does to our body. And we'll also talk about how you can be tested for gluten sensitivity if that's something that you're interested in doing. We'll talk about the pros and cons of that. And then we will very quickly get into the meat of the course, which is actually getting the gluten out of your diet. But for today, let's just do a quick review of just a few basic terms. Celiac disease is the first thing that we'll talk about. And celiac disease, there are three terms that come up a lot when we talk about gluten sensitivity. One is celiac disease, one is gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance, and then the other one is wheat allergy. And I just really wanted to find those three things for you so we can all make sure that we are on the same page in regards to what we're talking about. Celiac disease is actually an inherited disorder. And it is an autoimmune disorder. What autoimmune means is that your body attacks itself. Your immune system attacks your own body, and something triggers that. In the case of celiac disease, the ingestion of gluten causes your body's immune system to attack the lining of the gut. And what that does is that causes these little villi here. Let me get a pointer so I can show you. You know, your normal intestine normally looks like this. And we have these little villi that go in and out and in and out. And all of these little cells here lining the villi of the intestine soak in all the nutrients that we need out of our food. But when we have celiac disease and we ingest gluten, then our immune system starts attacking all of these cells, and it just blunts, what we call blunts, all of these villi. So then your intestine is flat like this, and you don't have all of those little villi. And this is what the intestine of someone that has celiac disease looks like. This right here is the lining that lines the inside of the intestine, and this is deep, like you took a slice of the intestine. So you don't see this on the surface, but this is the stuff that you see on the surface up here. And as you can see, it doesn't look like it looks up here. Let me erase all of that so you can see. So you've got these in and out here in a normal intestine, and then it's just perfectly flat here. And this is where your food would pass by here, or your food would pass by up here and get down into all these little crypts here. And this is where you would normally absorb your food. So that is what celiac disease is. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder that causes the destruction of the villi of the intestine when the person with celiac disease ingests gluten. Now, if somebody who has celiac disease is not eating gluten, their intestine will look normal. And so this is why someone with celiac disease, if they've already gone gluten-free and they go and they get biopsied to see if they have celiac disease, the doctor's not going to be able to tell because their gut is going to look normal because they have not been eating gluten. The interesting thing about celiac disease is that most people with celiac disease, and the experts estimate it's up to 95%, they never know that they have celiac disease. They go their entire life being undiagnosed. And there's a couple of reasons that this can happen. One reason is that whatever symptoms they're having from the celiac disease, they just think are normal for them. If you think about people who get glasses for the first time and they say, I didn't even realize that the trees, that I should be able to see the leaves on the trees until I got glasses and I knew that the leaves were there. And they just had become accustomed to what was normal for them and thought that was normal for everyone. And the same case in celiac disease. People can have diarrhea or constipation or abdominal pain or discomfort or bloating or whatever symptom it is that they have. And that can be their normal, and so they won't ever realize that something's wrong. Or if the symptoms are bad enough that they know that this isn't normal, that something is wrong, their doctor never connects it with celiac disease, and they get diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome or some other diagnoses because their doctor never looked for celiac disease. Now, another thing to remember about celiac disease is that these people are likely to present with gastrointestinal symptoms because of that intestinal damage that we just talked about. As we'll talk about in just a second, people with gluten sensitivity that aren't celiac don't always present with the gastrointestinal symptoms, and there's a reason for that. But most people with celiac disease will have some form of gastrointestinal symptoms, although not all of them will. Also with celiac disease, there are tests that you can have. Again, you have to be eating gluten for those tests to be positive. There is a blood test that can look for the antibodies against gluten that your body forms when you have celiac disease. And the gold standard is to have the biopsy of the intestine done. And that's just done through an endoscopy where you're put to sleep or given some I don't care medicine. And the doctor takes a lighted scope through the mouth, through the stomach, into the small bowel, takes a quick biopsy and comes back out. The actual procedure itself takes about 5 minutes to do. It's super quick. You can do it in an afternoon between the time it takes you to get signed in and prepped and anesthesia and all of that. And so it's a fairly easy thing to do. And you don't have to do the prep that you have to do for a colonoscopy where you have to fast for a day or more. So that is good. So don't hesitate to go get tested if you think that you might have celiac disease. And again, we'll talk in another lesson or two about how you can go about getting tested for celiac disease. Gluten sensitivity is when you have a sensitivity to gluten, but you don't have celiac disease. The reaction to gluten is different for people who have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or some people call it non-celiac gluten intolerance. I prefer sensitivity to intolerance because sensitivity implies a larger range of reaction. To me, gluten intolerance makes it sound like, well, I only get a little tired if I eat gluten, or if I only get a little tired, or I get a little bit of stomach pain, so I'm really not intolerant. I'm just sensitive. So I like the term sensitive better, but they're used interchangeably, gluten intolerance and gluten sensitivity. But what gluten sensitivity is where when you when you ingest gluten, your body mounts an inflammatory response to that gluten. It sees the gluten as a foreign invader and causes a lot of inflammation. And that inflammation in turn inflames the gut, which can cause some gastrointestinal symptoms, but it doesn't cause the damage to the villi the way that celiac disease and that autoimmune response causes damage to the villi. So if you were to have an intestinal biopsy and you're gluten sensitive, but you don't have celiac disease, then you're not going to see that intestinal damage. The inflammation in the bowel then causes what we call leaky gut, and we'll go into that again in more detail in another lesson or two. And that leaky gut causes little microscopic openings in the intestine that are larger than what they normally should be, and that allows a lot of toxins into the bloodstream that then cause an inflammatory reaction in other parts of the body. And that inflammatory reaction is what causes the multitude of symptoms that can happen. And you can have those symptoms with celiac disease too, because the damage to the villi also causes leaky gut and allows all of these toxins in. And so that's why so much of it is overlapping. But for people that have gluten sensitivity and they don't have celiac disease, they are much more likely to present with symptoms that aren't gastrointestinal. They may have some gastrointestinal complaints, and they may actually have a lot of gastrointestinal complaints, but it's entirely possible that they have no gastrointestinal complaints. And that was definitely the case for me. I actually did have some gastrointestinal problems, but I was in that group of people that thought those problems were normal issues. But so going into looking at whether or not I had a gluten sensitivity, I really didn't think I did, because I didn't have gastrointestinal symptoms that I knew of. And I had been taught in medical school that gluten sensitivity was celiac disease, and celiac disease is always has gastrointestinal symptoms. And so that really delayed my diagnosis. But a lot of people that have gluten sensitivity do not have gastrointestinal symptoms. And then finally, we'll discuss really quickly wheat allergy. Actually, before we talk about wheat allergy, let me go back and say, for gluten sensitivity and testing for gluten sensitivity, there are no reliable diagnostic tests for gluten sensitivity. There are tests that you can do that will look for antibodies to gluten sensitivity, and there are some food sensitivity tests that may or may not have value. The bottom line is, if these tests come back positive and tell you that yes, you have a gluten sensitivity, then they're very valuable, because that really can motivate you to know that yes, gluten is a problem for you, and yes, you need to eliminate it from your diet. But a lot of times these tests will come back negative in people that have a gluten sensitivity. And it can give them a false sense of comfort that gluten isn't their problem, when it really is. So even if you do these tests and they come back negative, if you have symptoms that would suggest that you have a gluten sensitivity, you really should still go on a gluten-free diet for at least a week. I prefer a month. Some people say 3 months. I noticed a difference within a week, but some people it will take a month, and some people it will take a little bit longer than that. But go on a gluten-free diet for some period of time to see, even if you have a negative test, because the tests are very often negative. Now, wheat allergy. A wheat allergy is entirely different from celiac disease or gluten sensitivity. A wheat allergy is your traditional, what you think of as an allergic response to something, like somebody that's allergic to peanuts or a bee sting or pollen. You get a reaction that causes itchy, watery eyes, sneezing, coughing, wheezing, hives, itchy skin, and it can be found with traditional allergy testing. And typically the people that are looking into going gluten-free are not people that fall into the wheat allergy area. But if you do have these symptoms, then it may just be a wheat allergy and not a gluten sensitivity in the sense that we talk about gluten sensitivity. Of course, you'll still need to eliminate gluten from your diet since all wheat has gluten in it, but it is an entirely different a beast. And so we're not going to spend any time in this course talking about wheat allergy other than to say just that. If you're wondering how you differentiate between celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity, the answer is that you get tested for celiac disease, and if you don't have celiac disease, then you go on a gluten-free diet. And if the gluten-free diet helps, then you're considered to have gluten sensitivity. Again, if you're gluten-free and you get tested for celiac disease, that's going to come back negative. So there's always that possibility that you do have celiac disease and it's undiagnosed. There are some genetic markers for celiac disease that can kind of help you with that, and we'll go through those later. But the genetic testing isn't a good diagnostic test for celiac disease. It just lets you know that you're at risk for celiac disease. So is it important to know if you have celiac disease versus non-celiac gluten sensitivity? Because after all, you're going to take gluten out of your diet regardless of which one you have. So is it important for you to know? And the answer to that is yes, it is important to know. Celiac disease is a very serious thing to have. And not that gluten sensitivity isn't serious, because it certainly is, especially in my case, but the health implications of celiac disease can be very, very serious. You can be at risk for other autoimmune disorders. The likelihood of nutritional deficiencies are much higher. The likelihood of permanent damage to the gut is much higher. The likelihood of subsequent cancers due to that damage of the gut is higher. If you have celiac disease, that's an inherited genetic disorder, and you need to know that so that you know if your children are at risk. If you have celiac disease, it's much more important for you to screen your children and to eliminate gluten from their diets as well. If you have celiac disease, it's much more important for you to go gluten-free prior to getting pregnant. If you're considering getting pregnant and having children, the diagnosis of celiac disease helps you get medical care paid for more easily by insurance in comparison to a diagnosis of gluten sensitivity. And that's primarily because gluten sensitivity really isn't considered a quote-unquote real diagnosis in traditional medicine. That is changing, and it's changing fairly rapidly, but you may find in working with your personal physician that they don't see any kind of gluten sensitivity other than celiac disease, and that is a really big problem right now, and I really hope that will change, because I certainly know from my own experience that that gluten sensitivity is truly a real disease. So between now and our next lesson, I want you to do a couple of things. I want you to think about your family and your family history and your parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles and such. And know, number one, have any of them been diagnosed with celiac disease? Because if they have, then you're at really high risk of having the disease as well. Or if no one's been diagnosed with celiac disease, do other people in your family have symptoms that would suggest that they have celiac disease? And if they do, then you really need to consider that celiac disease may be what you have and not just a gluten sensitivity. And those things will kind of help you to know how important it is to be tested for celiac disease before going on to a gluten-free diet. And we'll talk about those things in the future in the next lesson or two. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope it's helped clarify some things for you. Please let me know if you have questions. You can ask me questions anytime. The best way to do that is in our Facebook group because other people may have the same questions as you, and everyone can see the answers there. But if you have a question that's private or you really don't want other people to know about it, please feel free to message me on Facebook and ask me the questions privately, and I'll be happy to answer those as well.